Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we're joined by Richard Lipari, CIO of Ventura County Credit Union. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Nice to meet you, and thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyber, Lynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until it's too late and the hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass your security, so companies need a way of knowing when someone's gotten past their security. That's where Cyberlinks comes in. We've partnered with the best cybersecurity companies in the world to be able to provide our clients with the best solutions at the best prices. So whether it's managed SIM, SOC, EDR, MDR, XDR, you name it, we'll help you find the best solution at the best price. Find out more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyber, Lynx.com. And now back to our show. Richard, for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about Ventura County Credit Union and your role there as CIO?
Yeah, so Ventura County Credit Union, we actually are celebrating 75 years this year. That's how long the credit union's been around. We operate in and around the Ventura County area of, I think that's learning all the areas of California, being new to the area, but that's like the Central Coast, southern, upper southern area. We have 8 branches. We're about 1.5 billion with over 75,000 members, and we're about a little over 200 employees. So we're a community-based credit union in our market. As my role of CIO, fairly new to the organization. My area of oversight is obviously the technology area of the organization and the various teams underneath there, and also including the project management office, managing the work and project initiatives across the org.
Love it. Well, being new to the role, I'm not going to grill you on that, but I am curious. I do love kind of the origin story of a CIO, because I think it's really interesting that, we've had so many on the show, and I don't think any two have had the same career path. And I think there's a lot of people who think that if you're not some Uber hacker hacking into the Pentagon by 16, then you're probably not going to make it in tech. And I don't think, I think that's such a, nothing could be further from the truth. So I'd love to hear your origin story, how you got into tech and how you got to CIO.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And it's definitely been a journey. I've always been a technology-driven person, from my younger years in high school, where I was learning programming to, being a PC specialist and just troubleshooting, desktop computers. I would say so. As my career, I've worked for companies like America Online, which was, for those of you that still remember, it used to be one of the largest internet service providers back in the day, and I did tech support. Also worked for a company, GTech, that managed the lottery systems for like 28 states. So I got to learn a lot of the financial aspects and the technology aspects of things. And I would say most of the technology skills I've built and learned were from, the School of Hard Knocks, not so much from the schooling side, just kind of been there, done that experience. I've been in credit unions for over 17 years. And so in 2008, when I got my first credit union role, and it was an IT director, it was for a 7-employee credit union, 50 million in assets, one branch. So at that size, you have to wear multiple hats. Not only was I the technology guy, I had to do a little bit of accounting, do some loans. And as I kind of learned that in the 5 years I was with that credit union, I really learned more about the business. And that's really kind of where I started, thinking more outside of just the technology aspects of the business, but also how does technology play into the other parts of the business? And then in 2013, we merged with, at the time, New Sender Credit Union, which was 1.4 billion. They're now almost 5 billion. Where there I was their vice president of information systems. And I started with just a small team. It was 3. It was the data integrations team and development team. And during my 7 years there, not only did I build some of these other areas of the organization, like software development, the core systems, business transformation. Through my 7 years there, they were very educational based credit union. So there was a lot of investment in staff and leadership. And that's where I started to kind of transition from the hands-on technical kind of guru more into leadership skill development around emotional intelligence, business communication. How do you lead? How do you have difficult conversations? And then that gradually kind of led to having more of strategic skill sets and developing, where does the credit union need to go from a technology perspective, or any business for that matter, and then how do we execute and get there? And that's really what I got really excited me and drove me. And I know to prepare myself for a CIO role, you have to know more than just the technology side of the house. And so I got offered a role at Lighthouse Credit Union out of Dover, New Hampshire, where for about 4 years, I was their vice president of operations, business intelligence, and automation. And it really broadened my perspective of leading a team that wasn't traditionally the technology side of the house. It was a lot of the back office teams that supported the organization and kind of make the credit union run. And so I learned a lot in that experience of kind of bridging that gap from operations technology, and then combining that with my strategic, planning and vision and execution experience that I had been building. I felt like I was ready for that, CIO or executive level role, and things aligned, and it was about a 3.5 month interview process with Ventura County Credit Union. Got the role, and and so now I feel like I've hit the ground running. But that's kind of, I feel, has prepared me for being a CIO. It was more than just technology skills; it was leadership, critical thinking, and understanding a more broader aspect of the business than just the technology side of the house.
So many things to unpack there. Interestingly, after the operations role, were you did you naturally want to go back to when you went into kind of the C-suite, you wanted to go the CIO route instead of like a COO? Uh,
Yeah, it's a great question. It was both. So, it was an opportunity where I was looking, and I was actually interviewing for both roles because I felt I could facilitate both. And in some instances, sometimes the CIO is is overseeing operations as well. But I felt prepared I could do both. But I was more passionate on the technology side of the house because I felt like it brings so much to the table and help execute, because so many things around operations depend on technology. So, technology is always involved. But yeah, I felt I was prepared for either role. And, this one it made a lot of sense in so many ways. And so, glad I got the opportunity. And now I'm like, 65, 66 days in.
Very nice. And so I'm also curious, going back to, the early days where you're in that 7-person kind of, uh, whatever credit union, right? And you're wearing all these hats. I think it's, kind of tantamount to working in a startup or any other small organization where you really learn the ins and outs of the whole company, right? What it takes when you're on the ground and there's just a handful of employees. Everybody kind of knows the business. You got to know the business, right? So you get
Exactly.
it. So it's kind of this accelerated mailroom to management, crash course, if you will, by working in a small organization. And so it's interesting to me. You get so many people who kind of stayed on the corporate side, right? They got into a large organization like you did with AOL, and for a lot of people, they'd be very tempted to stay with the large companies because it's what they know. They're comfortable with it, and they just kind of stay that way. What was it they kind of lured you over to that small credit union?
Yeah, so I was at the time, G-Tech lost the contract in Albuquerque, and that's where I was working prior.
Mhm.
And so, either you had to move, or if you were going to stay, find another job. And so I just went out to the market and didn't know what a credit union was. Just saw that they were looking for somebody with technology experience, and it was one of the few roles I applied for, and I got that. And it was one of those roles that I took that it's changed my life in so many ways, not only professionally but also personally. And I'll kind of share some of that story a little bit later. But yeah, I would say I really appreciated working for that small organization, and I reported to the CEO at the time, Kathy Crane, who's been a mentor of mine, since then. It's helped me learn so much. But to your point, yeah, you're forced to learn so much of the business. So when we merged with the larger credit union, I felt I had a leg up with all my peers or other people in technology. So I always had a different perspective because I understood some of the other parts of the business. And so that was valuable because I felt I could kind of fill a gap that was there, and then kind of bring some of my team along with me to learn other parts of the business. Because, the fact of the matter is, not everyone's going to have that opportunity to work for a small organization to wear multiple hats. And so, if you do work at a large organization, I think that's where it's key of understanding other parts of the business and setting goals, whether that's shadowing other areas, being on a committee, things to kind of learn other parts of the business. To kind of broaden your perspective on things and allows you to kind of add more value than more than just the technology side.
Yeah. That's great. It's wild. I mean, you make all these plans, decide I'm going to go and then it's life has other plans for you, right? So
Yeah,
it ends up being the thing out of whatever the opportunity presented itself and you took it. So whether
yeah.
it's the small credit union or coming back to the IT side instead of going staying operations. You
Yeah,
just never know.
you never know, and that's why you got to be prepared for whatever opportunities come along. And I felt like I was in that good position to be able to do that.
Well, let me ask you, because I think one of the things I'm most curious about when it comes to the financial sector and especially with credit unions is how you're implementing AI and different automations now in order to kind of be competitive. Because I mean, let's face it, credit unions have to be, right? You're not like
Hmm.
Chase Bank where you can be, you're massive, you've got tons of funds flowing through. I mean, 1 billion and whatnot under, that's a nice size, but at the same time, it's really small compared to some of the other larger, institutions.
Right.
So I suppose the question is, what are you guys doing, or what are you doing or seeing in terms of AI and automation to help make credit unions more competitive?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think all organizations at the end of the day need to be looking at operational efficiency because the answer can't always be to add more staff. And I think for credit unions like Ventura County Credit Union are at a pivotal moment where they've started to see significant growth from a smaller institution, and now we need to do things at scale. And how can we do that? And do we have the technology infrastructure to support that? And I think that's where automation, AI, RPA, or other automation tools come into play. I think a lot of parts of the business get complacent and are just like, well, we've always done it this way. And so I'm a big proponent of like, let's ask the why. Why do we do it like this? And is there a better way to do that? And I have found ways where organizations can be effective on that is sometimes having a dedicated team. So at Newsenda, it was called business transformation. So they would work with the business units, what's your day-to-day look at? What are your biggest pain points? And it could be something as like, we're spending 2 hours every day updating this spreadsheet. And it's like, okay, how could we do that better? And it might be an automation of a report to extract it from the data team, or it might be if we have to do this spreadsheet using some, an RPA or some other tool to kind of populate and update the data to kind of streamline it. Because people, they don't know what they don't know. And I think where, AI, in addition to automation, traditional tools that are out there, where AI has a place, I think it's interacting with the tools. So like, for example, as organizations adopt, especially financial institutions, credit unions tend to be conservative. A place where we're starting to see AI kind of play a part is as a knowledge-based interface platform. So, traditional old school ways is you have maybe an intranet with documents, you do a search and you get 50 results. And I'm just looking to look at what products do we offer or what's the benefits of our products. And so having a generative AI model that can then interact with frontline staff or back office and get them the information they need in a quicker way, in a more accurate way, instead of searching like a traditional kind of search. And so that's things that we're doing here at Ventura County Credit Union that has been very helpful. The other piece, as far as like a member-facing AI that we just recently rolled out, was Glia. You may have heard of that vendor. And so it's our phone-based phone banking interactive system that we've just rolled out only like a month ago. And so we'll continue to build on that and go to an authenticated layer where members can do even more transactional stuff in a more human-like interaction, as opposed to pushing a button and things like that. And then the various channels that we deploy it to.
So actually, that raises a great question. I mean, when it comes to phone-based banking, I mean, you rewind, 15, 20 years ago, phone-based was all the rage, right? You didn't have to go
Mm-hmm.
into the whatever the building anymore. That's not
Yep.
branch, right? That's it.
Yep.
You don't have to go into the branch. You could simply call up, game changer, right? Put in your pin, your info, your PIN, whatever, and boom, you could find out your balance, do certain things. So I'm kind of surprised to hear that that's, something that's still being innovated upon now. Are the numbers, is there a lot of people who actively use,
Yeah.
phone-based transactions?
Yeah, so I can actually give you an exact answer to that. So for this is our members calling in that specific is into our contact center, like to get a loan or open an account or other maintenance. So just taking that in its own bucket, which we do around 20,000 ish a month, I think, around there. Not individuals, the number of calls, but for our phone
Wow.
banking system, which we're in the process of plugging that into Glia for an authenticated side, we do 11,000 calls a month, and so it's an interesting thing because I can see where you're kind of going with this. It's like why didn't we go the direction of retiring some legacy type tools as opposed to the online, because you can do so much in our online channel. And the fact of the matter is, depending on your organization, where your market is, that could be different. If Ventura County Credit Union was somewhere else and we had low adoption of that tool, or we were a digital only credit union trying to get rid of our branches, that might make more sense. And then how do you transition away from it? Our model here that has worked well, because Ventura County Credit Union is a very well run financial organization. It's kind of a mix of both. It's a term I can't take the credit for. I was at a conference and someone used it called phygital. Like how do we merge the physical side of the business with the digital? And so some of the goals with like the Glia, for example, if you're calling into our contact center, you're interacting with this AI before you get to a human, unless you need them. Or if you go online and do a chat, or you're in a branch and we have self-service kiosks, you're going to have a similar experience, whether it's in the physical realm that you're interacting with the digital experience or the online space.
I mean, that's impressive. I mean, like, are we talking all total? That's like 31,000 calls a month that you guys are doing. But you think you said
Yeah.
20 and 10 or 11, something like
31,000.
that?
And yeah, and that's where kind of, the Glia comes in handy from even on the unauthenticated side is, we get some members that, what are your current rates? What are your hours? You kind of get those things, even though they're online. And some very basic, low level questions that at least an unauthenticated chatbot AI, however you want to call it, they've been around for years, can help minimize those going to the contact center. And that kind of goes back to our earlier conversation on operational efficiency. So of those 20,000 calls, maybe 15% of them are like, what are your hours? What are your current rates? Type things. And then when we get to an authenticated integration, and we can authenticate the member through some kind of voice interaction or on the online chat, and they want to do a transfer or know their balance and things like that, we could extend that even more. So instead of needing 25 contact center reps, maybe we only need in reality half that, or we can do double the amount of support because we have other tools to meet the members' needs.
Yeah, no, that's a surprisingly large amount of calls.
Yeah.
And that's a great use of technology to kind of, be competitive there. So
Yeah.
I can't help but think that when you're talking about, voice, and now with the advent of AI, and you've got all of this great technology to mimic the obviously the phone number, the person's voice, all kinds of stuff. So I think security is clearly, the future, right? It's going to be heavily security, focused. Everybody's concerned about it constantly now, and that's a great thing. So I think, what are some of the things that you're doing? I mean, I know that I'm a huge fan of tabletop exercises. I think they're an unsung hero in the world of IT and security. But is that something you've found good success with?
Yeah, I would say, for organizations that have, a business continuity plan and incident response, if you have not done a tabletop exercise, you need to do it. I mean, examiners should be pointing it out, but if they haven't, it's enlightening in situations I've been in of how unprepared you are. It's like just because you have a piece of paper saying, "Here's our plan, and this is what we do," that people are not prepared. And I think doing these tabletop exercises help organization and leadership really see that, and then kind of address those gaps from a communication or training and development standpoint, as opposed to it's just, oh, we got the documentation, here's our checkbox, but how are we doing that to keep it fresh in people's minds and feel prepared, so when those situations happen, regardless of what the tabletop is, that we're more prepared and know how to reference our policy and procedures.
I mean, I is it that it's inherently flawed to have this whole compliance and auditor thing where it everything seems like it just needs to be a check the box because oh somebody's going to check it. I need that documentation. So it doesn't really matter if it's actually implemented, if any thought went into it so much. I get that they're supposed to be, but I'm kind of I guess my question is it inherently flawed? Is the whole compliance and and auditing process because it kind of motivates and incentivizes people to just check the box. Yep, we did a tabletop exercise, but you didn't. You ran through it. Sure, one example, boom, it's on paper, done. But nobody really got any benefit out of it. It wasn't an aha moment. You didn't spend time like going through the possible scenarios and everybody being like, wow, what we need to do this and that,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know. What do you think? Am I just
So
am
no,
I off base?
yeah, no, I think there is some validity to that, and I think twofold. So when you should be doing, in my mind, more than one a year to keep it fresh. Two, someone needs to own it, and what are the gaps, and what did we learn from that tabletop exercise? Not that we just did it. And I'll give a good example. In one of my previous roles, that kind of lived under risk, and we kind of had an ISO there that kind of facilitated our tabletop exercises on some of these things. And it wasn't a standard thing like we would make a decision and then he would roll dice on the potential outcomes to kind of make it more randomized. And that really kept people like on their toes, are like, oh, is this, are we doing this correctly? Are we communicating effectively? And I think that was helpful. But yeah, there needs to be some ownership, and I think that does come from the top down in that aspect of like, yeah, we have this plan, but how are we measuring what good looks like? And I think those tabletop exercises, you have to be realistic and honest with yourself, not just like a checkbox. Like, okay, it seemed like people were struggling on what to do once a disaster was declared or this incident was declared. What can we do to improve that?
So, am I hearing this right? Was this basically a little Dungeons and Dragons, dungeon master,
uh,
rolling the dice, be like, oh, here.
kinda,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome. I love it. That's a
Yeah.
great. So, just walk me through that for a second. Like, how did he integrate the or she integrate the dice into this?
So like an example would be there was a report. We identified an employee that happened to click a link on a phishing email,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Um, and they said they didn't do anything. They just clicked it before it got scanned or it got reported. And so the response, so the question would be, okay, so what do we do next? And it might be, okay, well, we're going to isolate that machine, run a scan, see if there's anything on that, and follow up with that email to see if it is tied to something fraudulent or some kind of attack. And then he would roll his dice and be like, okay, well, you find out now you got 10 other people that said they got the email. So now what do you do? And it's like, okay, well, maybe we need to do a network wide lockdown. And then you make a decision on that. And then you find out, oh, data was compromised or data wasn't compromised. So what would you do next? And so it'd be kind of be like that. There would be these,
Yeah.
key moments of, you would assume, okay, oh, it's just this, he's just going to go along the track that it's one person, one workstation that's potentially impacted. And then he rolls the dice to be like, oh, surprise. You find out that's not the case.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's really fun. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it adds the just the right amount of randomness and gamification into the whole thing to make it
Yeah.
more engaging. Because the reality is that is life, right? It is we don't
Mhm.
see all the variables going on in the matrix.
Yeah.
We can't see what's going to happen if this happens, then that. So I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and it was, and just kind of I guess top that off is we would then, it would get graded, and it would be a leadership and group feedback of on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective were we in doing that. So it's not just, again, we did it and we did this exercise and it was fun. It's like, how well did we do? And if the overall score was like 7 out of 10, that's a 70%. What can we do to improve that? Where did we feel we fell down because people didn't feel prepared? And that's important because that helps keep you honest and then address those gaps.
Now, are you doing tabletop exercise with all the stakeholders? I mean, the you know CEOs, COO, the CFO, everybody, and
Mhm.
legal on you call in legal. What like how far do you go with it?
Yeah. So, I- I've been at two different organizations prior to Ventura County Credit Union. both did a little bit different, but on my last one, yeah, it included all the critical stakeholders of all the various business units. So all could be prepared. In some cases, a lot of the stakeholders in there may not necessarily be contributing much, but they're at least seeing what the experience is and what happens in the background, so they are prepared if something like this happens, what to do. And if it's more broader, like there's an earthquake and you're doing some kind of tabletop exercise, like what do you do as an organization there? Yeah, you want to make sure you have the right stakeholders there, and it's not just an executive or senior leadership type exercise.
And did you, in your previous, roles, did you experience the kind of compliance just checking the box, or did it from the get everybody was all on board after the first one? How did it go? Were people really excited about it? Or like, shit, we got another one. Here we go.
Yeah, I've been at an organization where it was obviously just a checkbox, and then there was an incident, and it was a lot of guessing. What do we do? Where do we go find this document? And so that was insightful. And I think a lot of organizations, like I was kind of saying earlier, as they grow in complexity and potential impacts, you know, still kind of are in that smaller institution frame of mind. And so it's trying to, go beyond that. Well, what does this, mean if our network goes down? We're not talking it's affecting 3,000 members. We're now talking it's over 75,000. And so what does that look like? And so I think some institutions struggle in that transition from less than $1 billion to a larger one, where you're actually testing what you've actually created actually works.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I think that's a fair point that I think that a lot of most, if not all organizations struggle as you go from one level to the next, growing. I don't care if it's growing from one person to two or 1
Yep.
million, to 10, one, to 100 million to 500 million, whatever it is. There's, it's such a massive change for an organization to change
It
their
is.
ways. You can't just stay the same or you will stay the same. Right.
Right.
So I think it's only fair that there's going to be, some sort of, kind of smaller organizational thinking when it comes to things. As a company grows, so too does their thinking.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious, did you find the tabletop exercise was one of these things that really helped people get out of that smaller organizational mindset and be like, oh, hey, hold up. We really need to start thinking this stuff through, and this is important. Or was it easy to stay in the small org, check the box? This is just for compliance. Or was that just a cultural thing? Is it, kind of that's the corporate culture is coming down from the CEO and like, nope, that's how it's going. So you kind of have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point, and I think where organizations, as that's happening, is one, how are you measuring what good looks like in those situations? And for example, it could be maybe you have a third party that's facilitating the business continuity to give their unvarnished kind of feedback on how we felt prepared, and as opposed to just kind of going through the motions of that exercise. And and it has to be a top down, like it is a culture thing. Like, no, we need to hold ourselves accountable to what this plan is saying, and that we're effective at delivering it. And so I think, one is you're setting clear expectations, and two, we're holding ourselves and the organization accountable based on what that outcome looks like.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, even if everybody goes through the exercise and they're like, oh, wow, that's enlightening. If the culture is one of, uh, you know, we're not really concerned about it. We're not going to spend the money on security. We're not going to spend the money on IT. We're just going to, and it's this kind of small org kind of thinking. And that sounds bad to say it like that, but especially when you get like those small family owned businesses, right? Those tend to be, and that's probably not the case when it comes to credit unions. Although I suppose it could be for the smaller ones, where they sort of feel like it's their personal money, and it's hard to get them out of that mindset. You don't do you see that in on the credit union side
Yeah.
of the smaller?
Yeah, I don't know if it's like, they're thinking it's their money. I think it's from a cybersecurity and, kind of that standpoint. It's a security through obscurity, right? We're small, we're not going to be targeted, and therefore
Right.
we don't maybe weigh in on these aspects of the business as much, or partner with a third party vendor to kind of fill those gaps. Because when you're smaller, you can't hire sometimes dedicated people, so you do it through vendor partnerships, which is critical, and then that you're managing those vendors effective. But I think that's some of it. It's like, oh well, that's not really going to affect us because it's a small percentage of this. But then that thing happens, whether if it's a natural disaster or it's a cybersecurity event, and then you're there with your, what has that saying go? You get caught with your pants off, and you see that all the time. And sometimes these even large organizations where they do the root cause of what happened, a lot of cases that end result end up being the human element's the weakest element on no matter how much technology you have, or we're not patching things and on various systems. So sometimes it's very simple things, but we're not putting enough focus on it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And it is, the people are the weakest link. I mean, it's easy to patch systems. It's easy to put in a lot of security controls versus training somebody who's busy. That's not their job. They're not focused on technology. They're easily duped by a really good email. It's like, oh, it looked like it came from Microsoft, and I clicked on it and I logged in, and then nothing happened. Like, yeah, well, that's fair, right? The bad guys are getting much better. And so,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. I don't know. I don't think that it's just going to be about awareness. I think there's got to be some kind of AI tool that's going to help people with the day-to-day on their desktop. Be like, look at the email. I get that the sheer quantity of
Mm-hmm.
email that's going through all the email servers at any given time. It's mind-blowing, right? So you
Yeah.
can't have AI looking at every single one of those, because you would literally melt the planet, right? It would just like go too much, boom, that's it, right? It's just too
Yeah.
much energy. But if you move that to the desktop though, and now those things are being viewed, and analyzed from right there in Outlook on the desktop using that processor to be like, hey, Matt, don't click on that. It looks legit, but it's definitely not, because I checked the link, and I know there's all kinds of tools to try to do that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not really, because those are kind of set, and it's, the whether it's DNS filtering, spam filtering. I'm kind of curious when it gets down to Outlook is using, you know, generative AI to look at that, analyze the links.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's not the most efficient use of AI, but it seems like a kind of natural progression, since that is the weakest link, and we're not really using technology to kind of help the human, and that is the whole
Right.
point of technology.
Yeah.
It seems like that's a product just waiting to happen, and Microsoft's like, yeah, yeah, and Google's like, yeah, we've been working on it, Matt. It's coming. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, I think it's two parts. It's that's a great thought. It's like, if you have a button that says, hey, analyze this email, like it's gotten through all these other security filters, but hey, generative AI on this one off, let me know what your best thoughts are on it. But I still think that doesn't negate the training and accountability piece. So like our organization's doing phishing campaigns, right? And someone does click it, and we're holding people accountable, like, hey, this, thank God this was just a test. You failed here. You got to go through retraining, or maybe it's things that count towards a performance review. I think when you treat things like that seriously from accountability and employee performance, they really get bought in, because then they understand the impacts to the organization, because we're holding them accountable to it. But kind of going back to how does AI make us more efficient? I think that's a great example, as well as, in the financial institution industry, we have, a lending, underwriting tool, right? But it would be cool if I could, you get all the information and you use AI to, like, what's the risk criteria for this person? Can I loan to them? And AI can look at the large picture, instead of, it's less of an if this then that. It's looking at the overall picture of the organization. Whereas now that kind of happens from a human looking at various things to determine, if this is someone worth lending to, and it makes the frontline staff then more efficient, because then something doesn't have to get routed to another person, unless there's, a certain exception that we want that human element. On the member side, it'd be cool if the AI is looking at their account. It's like, hey, you're probably going to be short of funds in 7 days, because you have these payments that you normally pay come through. Do you want me to transfer money for you? And kind of like, help members manage their finances more effectively, to kind of avoid some of these fees that you see a lot of members, your customers, I'd say, at banks and stuff, kind of have.
Yeah. Or it could tie right into their phone. So as they near Starbucks, it's like, really? You're running low on funds. Are you sure you want to stop at
Yeah, exactly.
Starbucks?
Yeah, they're like, I
That's
mean, the
messed up.
sky's the sky's the limit, but it's like I think, history has shown, I mean, when you look where we're at from a, social media technology standpoint, when you do things that make people's lives easier or more fulfilling, those are products and tools that they get attracted to.
Yeah.
Good, bad, and indifferent about the goods and bads of social media, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of use in that.
No, for sure. So, I'm kind of curious, when it comes to as you transitioned kind of from the ops side over to the CIO side of things,
Yeah.
and I I think for a lot of people in tech and a lot of people moving up to the C-suite, that transition into leadership and then, kind of making kind of the data-driven decision making. Did you find that challenging, or was that just something that kind of came naturally to you? You're like, "Yay, fantastic, love this part of it too." How did that go for you?
Yeah, I think so. I'll kind of answer it in two parts. One, I'll respond to the kind of the data-driven organization and kind of skill set, but go back to the executive or leadership skills. So and I would assume most technology leaders would agree with the statement is normally tech people don't have the best emotional intelligence or communication skills generally across the board, right? And so that was something that I really had to work on if I wanted to be successful in partnering with my peers and other business units around the organization. I had to really actively work on that. And one aspect of that is EQ, emotional intelligence. And some of the most successful businesses and leaders of an organization, it's not an IQ thing that determines success. It's actually an EQ. And so that was something I really actively, once I kind of identified and through some of my mentors and previous leaders, giving me some open and honest feedback, which I appreciate to this day, I've really focused in addressing and kind of building those skill sets and feeling I'm making myself a better rounded leader because it's not just the technology side. It's like, how do I communicate? How do I get people to buy into initiatives? And how do I support my peers in the organization? And so that took a lot of work and many years of reading books, taking classes, and doing perception checks with people I work with, to measure myself. Am I progressing in those ways? So that what I would say was a challenge for me as far as that aspect. From data and data decisioning, that was something that kind of came fairly easy because I had been working with data my whole life. But how do you take that data and transition in it to get support in the organization for a certain business decision? I'll give a great example. At my last credit union, we had what they call video tellers or ITMs at like 4 or 5 of our locations. And there was a perception that members don't like this technology, they're not using it. And I'm like, well, are we sure about that? It's just, how do we know? And the answers you get, well, it's all anecdotal. There's no evidence to support that. It's just what they are feeling or an observation in a short period of time. And so, as the data team reported under me, we kind of make sure we collected and coalesced all the data, and we did an analysis. And the data was showing it was actually quite the opposite. What was happening was 90% of the members that use these machines were choosing to do an ATM transaction, meaning they didn't need to talk to a video teller. And it was deposit, withdrawals, and transfers. That's like 90% of the financial transactions a member does. And so they were only looking at, well, the video tellers aren't getting a ton of calls. Well, that's correct. And we're okay with that because if they're going to do an ATM transaction, that's cheaper because there's not a human doing it. So it allows us to have that, better efficiency. And so once I show that, they get widen people's eyes. It's like, okay, yeah, we might have feelings and our gut instinct, but we need to validate that against actual data. So we're making the right decisions. Otherwise, we could have said this technology is not working and get out of that business. And then there could have been ramifications of that. And that's just one example, but there's been many in my career of, getting buy-in. Like we have to have a single source of truth of the organization. And when we make business decisions, there has to be data to support that.
No, I think that's great. And it's also really interesting because I think generally speaking, people tend to make an emotional decision and justify it
Mhm.
with the data. And it's really hard as humans to not do that, right?
Right.
Whether it's buying a car, buying some software, you name it. You kind of fell in love with something about that product or service. You're like, oh, that's cool. I gotta have that. And then you use data to justify it, because outside of it, it's really hard, being non-robots, to simply look at the data and decide, and kind of detach and be devoid of emotion altogether
Yeah.
in the situation. So that's a really tough one. But I think in your example, when you're not on the purchasing side, but actually the analyzing things side of things, it's really easy to take the emotional, side of it and be like, yeah, yeah, no, clearly nobody's using it. We should ditch this and save the money. And I
Right.
think that's a great, I, I, I think that really kind of hits the nail on the head, because I don't think you can divorce emotion. Now, happy to discuss it, but I don't think you can divorce emotion from decision making when it comes to like buying things, and possibly not even. No, I think in the example you made, that was a really great one. But do you think you can in the buying, side of things?
If as far as like, trying to remove the emotional aspect of a decision making.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's always that, especially if it's somebody's project or product, it's the whole, don't call my baby ugly kind of thing, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's where it's, building the relationships and then able to have open conversations with people you're working with that are kind of either own or managing those things, as you're looking at the data. And I think that's where a lot of data analysts or teams that live, either they live in operations or the technology side of the house, or their own division reporting up to the CEO. It's a consultative approach when you're looking at data. It's to your point. People make emotional decisions. I mean, I was even watching some old interview with Steve Jobs from a marketing, or people buying into a product. It's like they're going to remember how you made them feel, right? And sometimes that rolls over into things that people own or manage. And so, how do you separate that? And I think that's through a facilitated conversation, and as opposed to just one individual making that business decision.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine that there at your credit union, that's kind of the selling point, right? It's how you're making all these people, your customers feel. They feel like they're getting a much more personal service, that it's their
Hmm.
local community credit union versus a
Right.
Chase, a Bank of America, some big nameless, faceless
Yeah.
corporation. I guess it has a name, some big faceless
Right.
corporation. Right. So there the sale for you guys is a very emotional one too. It's your friendly local neighborhood credit union
Yeah.
versus the cold conglomerate, right? So,
Exactly.
and so they make that decision based off that. But to your point, how do you make sure that you're really using the data when you're making decisions, and not just, running off on your gut and feelings? And I think that's really the key, is, tying the data in, because you can fall in love just because you love something doesn't mean you're wrong to buy it or sell it, or, stop using it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean but having the data to back that up and be like, oh yeah, yeah, you're right. You love it and it's a great product. It'll fit nicely. Oh, you love it, but it doesn't, or you hate it. And the data is, shows a whole nother story. And so maybe that's really
Well,
the moral of that
yeah.
story.
And I think the other part, I mean, you could have the other where you know, it's a good idea, you love it, we've implemented it, and the data's showing it's not successful. Maybe it's not, we discontinue it. Maybe it's like, is our approach, how we rolled this out, incorrect? Let's dig
Right.
in. What is the data actually telling us? Is it awareness issue? The members just don't know we have this thing. Um, and yeah, and I think that's where it's a cultural change, by we're going to be a data-driven organization. And
Yeah.
what does that mean?
Well, I think another really interesting aspect of that is culturally, I think people are inundated with so much information, so many decisions, so much stuff all the time now, versus clearly versus any other time in history. We're running at like, warp speed, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in years past, they're going like 5 miles an hour. And so I think there's this tendency to want to just make these faster decisions, get information really quickly. You get that whole correlation causation, kind of fallacy that happens all the time. And so you really have to slow down and look at the data and take the time to dive in and be like, oh, hey, this is really what the data means. You're correlating things, incorrectly here. This is
Right.
not what's causing it. I get why you would think that, but as we dug
Yeah.
into the data, now we see that this is actually what's going on.
Yeah, I mean that's you're exactly right, and I think it's to your point. There's so much data. Sometimes individuals, and depending on your personality type, you get into analysis paralysis. Like you get looking too much into the data that you kind of get paralyzed. And I think it's important. It's making sure like we're not managing to the exception. We're managing to the rule, and and I think that's very important in how we're approaching things. But yeah, yeah.
Couldn't agree
It's a
more.
lot. Yeah.
Yep, it really is. Well, Richard, it has been an absolute blast having you on. I can't thank you enough for coming on. But before we go, can you tell everybody where they can find out more about you and more about Ventura County Credit Union?
Yeah, we have our website, which is vccuonline.net, which we can find everything regarding the credit union, our history, a little bit about our foundation that operates in our community. I'm in LinkedIn as well, so you can look me up on LinkedIn and look at some of my experience and connect if you're a future peer to chat with. But yeah, thank you, Matt, for your time. This has been a pleasure, and I do want to kind of last thing I want to say, because I mentioned it earlier and I never actually gave the answer. I love the credit union industry. I love the community and what it represents. But if it wasn't for getting into credit unions, I wouldn't have met my wife, because she worked at a credit union, and that's how we met. So that's where it's been help. Getting into credit unions has really been not only professional experience growth, but it's personally as well. So everything happens for a reason.
It sure does, and I love it. That is a perfect way to end it. Richard, thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.